Well, Lionel Barber, thank you so much for being here on the Gstaad Guy podcast.
It's great to be on the Gstaad Guy podcast.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak at Brilliant Minds and approached you right after you rushed off the stage and wanted to learn more about your life, your story. I have been aware of your name for a long time. As the ex-editor-in-chief of the FT, an author, an explorer. You have your own book, The Gambling Man, which has just come out in paperback in the UK, which is a big deal. And you are also reading the audiobook yourself. So for people who like the way you speak on this podcast, they can hear more.
It's the ultimate test.
It's the ultimate test.
Because Gambling Man is about a Japanese entrepreneur, Masayoshi Son of SoftBank. So the key is that I wasn't allowed to do my Japanese accent, and you can probably understand why.
Around the World with your host, the Gstaad Guy. We welcome you back to the Gstaad Guy podcast, sharing stories of excellence with those in the know for those who just know.
I'd love to start a conversation with your idea of journalism and what journalism means to you. You dedicated a massive part of your life to journalism and 15 years as the editor-in-chief of the FT. I'd love to know about the why.
My father was a journalist. He came from a very modest background in Leeds in the north of England, and he left school when he was barely 15. So he was self-taught, he didn't go to college, and he always used to tell the three sons that journalism was the best possible job, but it's not a business, it's not a profession, it's a vocation. And what he meant by that is that it's something which is deeply serious. It's about finding the truth and reporting facts. Obviously, there's commentators and people who offer opinions, and there's all the excitement, which we'll talk about with the new journalism built around digital. But at its heart, it is about providing for an informed citizenry in a democracy. So I take it quite seriously, but of course, I've had a lot of fun as well.
And would you say that the driver to become a journalist is fundamentally to be curious?
Absolutely. Most important quality. I tell all people who think they want to be a journalist that the greatest quality you can have is to be curious and not to be cynical. Because if you've already made your mind up and you're not interested in exploring things or finding out things and then trying to organize them into a story or a column or informing people, then you're never going to be any good at all. So curiosity, I think that applies to other parts of life, by the way, but particularly important for journalism.
Has that always been part of your DNA?
Not always. I think I've always wanted to express myself, and I was obviously, not obviously, I mean, I kind of flirted a bit with theatre. I was the drum major in Wojciech's, in Büchner's Wojciech, and I liked doing a little bit of play, but I wasn't really very good. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be a politician because I'm not flexible enough, shall we say. So I thought, actually, and I'd hesitate about journalism because following one's father is always a bit of a problem. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd never be as good as him. But then I thought, actually, the only job that I've been offered is one job in journalism in Scotland, and I think I really want to do it. And that's the job for me.
And when was that?
That was in 1978. I just finished my degree at Oxford in German and modern history.
Wow.
And I thought, Scotland, never been there. I was from London, England, didn't travel that much in the family, apart from actually to Germany and France. And I thought, I'm going to do it. And it's going to be an adventure because if you've spent 3 years at Oxford, 1 year in Germany as a student, then going to Scotland felt something like new and very exciting.
And what were you covering there?
Well, the problem was that I didn't have anything to cover because I was just English in a sea of Scots,
Okay.
and I didn't have any specialist knowledge, so I didn't really know. But of course, if you're in journalism, you need to have a speciality. Well, clearly I couldn't be a reporter on German literature. So I thought about health, but I'm not a scientist, so I was useless at that. And then I went to, I'll always remember this, in 1980 I went to Glasgow, and there was Mrs. Thatcher's intellectual guru, who was a man called Sir Keith Joseph, and he was talking to a bunch of businessmen. And I remember him saying, why is this country, and you've got to remember, in the late 70s, 1980, Britain was a terrible place. I mean, we were seen as the sick man of Europe. Nothing was happening. The unions were out of control. And Keith Joseph said, business is the most exciting thing. If you're a businessman, think of all the dramas, the ups and downs. And I suddenly thought, actually, that's what I should write about, because it seems very exciting. There was only one problem, that I didn't know anything about business, and certainly not finance.
I think most people who start out in business know little about business.
That may be true, but if you're in journalism, you probably need to have some idea. But of course, it was new terrain, and they were good. They were good to me. They kind of agreed to train me a little bit. Now, my knowledge probably went only a skin deep, but it was enough in 1981 to be named the Young Journalist of the Year in Britain.
Wow.
And the Scotsman had never won that. And I got these telegrams, and I got letters, and there was one from the first Scottish National MP, SNP member of the European Parliament, and it said, I'll try and do the accent, "Dear Lionel, I'm so proud that a Scotsman like Lionel Barber has won the Young Journalist of the Year in Britain. Congratulations."
You have bad news for him.
Yeah, for her.
For her.
I'm English. I couldn't break the news. It was too hard.
You have to take the award.
Yes, I did. I got it. And that was why I got hired by the Sunday Times in 1981 and joined the business news section.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What did business look like in 1981?
Well, it was terrible because we had a strong pound and British industry was completely uncompetitive. So we had all this manufacturing industry was collapsing. So I was made the industrial correspondent. And my colleague said that being industrial correspondent during the Thatcher government was a bit like being the monastery's correspondent under Henry VIII. There's nothing to cover. But I do, on the serious note, I mean, I remember going to see these business people along with a much more experienced reporter because I didn't really know the right questions. And we would interview executives, and at least two of them broke down in tears as they were describing the job losses. And the technique that I learned from my colleague who had glasses and sort of silvery salt and pepper hair, he had terrible dandruff. So he'd get so excited that he'd start rubbing his hair and going, like this, and the cloud of dandruff would appear. And therefore the businessman just wanted to get us out of the office because of all the dandruff.
Oh, my God.
And they told us everything. So
It worked.
Yeah, I mean, actually, did I want dandruff? I mean, I'm interested in a story, but not too much dandruff, yeah.
Fine. How quickly did you have to share the story with the rest of your team at the time, given that it was a very different way of doing business?
Well, again, you have to remember, and I think it's worth reflecting because obviously I did very well later, and I was the Young Journalist of the Year, but I didn't know very much. And everybody at the Sunday Times was 15 years older. And I remember they sent me off to cover the fishing industry in Hull. Well, first of all, it's called Hull, not Hull. And I went there and I went down to the cafes and I interviewed a few fishermen, and I came back and I was having trouble writing it because obviously I didn't feel the fishing industry. I think I wrote that story about 6 times.
Wow.
And at the end, the editor literally tore it up in front of my eyes and said, "This is useless." And I said, why? And he said it reads like Mills and Boon, which is a kind of popular romance. I mean, I tried to make it heartfelt, and it was utterly terrible. But if you've had a story torn up in front of your eyes, I mean, that's pretty humiliating.
Yeah.
And I figured I wasn't sure whether I could do this after that. So you then have to, that's when resilience comes in, and you kind of have to see, I'm not going to let these people get me down, and try and come back.
How did you come back?
Two things. Great question, as they say. Two things. The first was I asked advice, and I found another journalist who actually worked on the Financial Times, and I'd met him on a young Königswinter conference in Berlin. And this chap said to me, your problem is that you don't have a patch. You don't have something specific that you're covering. You're kind of all over the place, and therefore you won't make any mark. So that was very good advice. And the second piece of advice was somebody said you should interview people, because if you're trying to write about the fishing industry, of which you know nothing, and you don't feel it. Whereas if you interview somebody, then you can write a bit of a profile and you get them to talk, and then your confidence will get better, and that probably will help. Well, that was very good advice.
Did you go back and interview the fisherman?
No, I interviewed a government minister.
As one does.
Yeah, I thought that was safer.
It probably is safer. So you took the leap of faith really into political interviews, really?
Yeah, business at that time. Politics came a bit later after I joined the Financial Times. I mean, I interviewed that government minister, but I sort of was trying to write about smaller businesses, and then I wrote about the City of London, finance.
Okay.
I was a bit more experienced by then, and as a result of that, I was then offered a job at the Financial Times.
Okay.
And the parting words, which is again for everybody who's thinking careers go in straight lines, they don't, because somebody said to me at my leaving party at the Sunday Times, you're going to be buried. Nobody's going to hear about you anymore, because you at the Sunday Times, you were making your mark. Join the Financial Times, it's over.
It's charming.
He was absolutely charming. And then somebody was driving, a very senior journalist, same thing, drove past me in his car, stopped, wound down the window and said, you're a rat. So I said, if I'm a rat, you're a sinking ship. I thought, I'm not having this.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is all by way of saying there are moments in everybody's career when you get a challenge and you have to push back.
Absolutely. What did the Financial Times look like at the time when you joined?
It was very much a paper of record. So we'd have all sorts of lots and lots of stories at the back, small companies, 3-paragraph stories. They covered everything. But of course, because there was no digital side, you needed to go to the Financial Times to find out, share price movements and company results. On the other hand, the paper was unique in Britain, and it's why I wanted to join, because it had a huge foreign correspondent network.
Mm-hmm.
They'd made a brilliant decision in the 70s to invest in a foreign network. It was like having a intelligence network all around the world. I mean, of course, we weren't spies, but, you'd have 4 people in Washington, 6 people in New York, 3 people in Germany, and all that, 3 or 4 in Paris. So I thought, I want to be a foreign correspondent. That's what I really want to do. Mm-hmm. So that's another reason why I joined the FT. And I also noticed, and this is important, that the Sunday newspapers, they were beginning to feel it was harder to do something different, because during the week, someone like the Financial Times were doing more in-depth background stories. Yeah. So it was fairly male, not many senior women, very serious. I got told in the last job interview, by the way, you've got the job, but we don't want any of your so-called Sunday Times scoops, which I took as a real insult.
You did?
Yeah.
I thought you'd take it as a compliment.
No, I think they
Believing.
basically, so, we're hiring you, but basically all your stories that have been on the front page the last 3 years were made up.
No. They
But,
weren't. I assume they weren't.
I got over myself.
Well, how did the timeline of hearing news or experiencing news or having a great interview to publishing it change over time while you were with the Financial Times?
Well, it was huge because when I joined, I mentioned those small stories. We had to do, 5 stories by 7 o'clock, 7:30.
Wow.
If you did a big interview, it had to be done on the day. We had this huge piece which occupied nearly a page. That was about 2,300 words. Big, deep analysis. If there was some huge bid, then you'd have to do it on the day, and that's a really tough ask. So when I moved to Washington, I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, which would be 9:30, and then working through until about 10 o'clock Washington time, and then filing. So, but as the internet took off, which was 99, 2000, suddenly people began to draw a distinction between sort of fast news, you can do it immediately. And by the way, you can do it any time of day.
Yeah.
And then the slow news, well, that can wait. And so everything changed. Everything speeded up. Mm-hmm. I think there was a rush to judgment often, not so much at the Financial Times, but, because everything was instant, I think it presented some real challenges. So when I became editor in 2005, after a long stints away in Washington, Brussels, and then New York, I think I was 50, so I was able to influence a lot how we tackled some of these questions and say, we're not going to rush things. We're going to be competitive, but we're not going to rush.
To my understanding, you, in many ways, won that competition on digital, where Financial Times became the leader in digital news quite quickly.
Yeah, we did undergo a revolution. It wasn't a Maoist revolution, because people tend to disappear in that kind of thing. It was very tough evolution.
Yes.
So it took several stages for us to get to where we needed to be in digital. But the 2 or 3 things that I said from the outset we needed to do were, one, have a separate news operation that was digital with news desks, and then bring it together with the news desk. So you couldn't have it to be print-led, i.e. everything revolving around the newspaper. We needed to get it to a position where the digital form was first and the newspaper was a derivative. And then we needed to explore all the amazing things that you could do with digital. And obviously that's the moving picture, that's video. That means journalists suddenly appearing on audio form, like podcasts as well as video. All that we had to do at once. And then we had to, crucially, which is where I think we did lead, was say people are going to pay for this.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
And obviously the business side supported this. And I said, I'll deliver the journalism, you deliver the business model. And it worked.
And so it did. And you maintained the pink paper.
Oh, that's crucial because it's like a luxury item.
It's also a status signal.
Definitely.
I read the FT, have the pink paper.
Yeah. And whereas people used to have the pink paper with a bowler hat, they don't have that now. But pink, or when I was in America, we never used to call it pink.
Okay.
Because that's dangerous. It could be pink, like you're pinky, political, communist or something. So we'd say it's
peach.
salmon color.
A salmon.
Well, or peach if you're in Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always would bucket a person into a certain bucket when I would see them reading the FT growing up, and still till today, I think it still has that certain status to it.
Cachet is one way of looking at it. Status. I agree with that, and I'm quite unashamed about when I was editor about bigging that up.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to charge somebody, a cup of coffee, then it better be worth it.
Yeah.
And that means you've got to find people who are truly original in their thinking, great writers, and finding, recruiting and retaining those people. Meanwhile, doing this digital transformation was the biggest challenge. But no, I always said, and that we're a premium product, but I also said that we were like special forces, lethal, small, but lethal.
Did you start your thinking while putting the teams together with, am I choosing the right people to satisfy the reader, or are you starting with who the reader is and working back from there?
Well, it was several things. I mean, first of all, I think, it's 15 years ago now when I took over, but actually 20 years ago. God, time flies. But, I got the job because the previous guy had messed up a bit, and we'd kind of lost a bit of direction. I hadn't expected to get the job. I mean, I'd not thought that I could get the job, but then I was sitting in New York thinking, this place is not doing well. Maybe they'll give me the job. And if they give me the job, then I got to have a plan.
Yeah.
So it was only, I began to think about that. And the question you ask is really important, which is, it's not about you. I mean, obviously I'd worked at the paper for 20 years when I'd got the job, almost 13 years abroad. But I knew, actually it's more than that, it's 16 years abroad. But I knew who the reader was. The readers that, they're smart, they're international. Yeah. So, and they're pretty well pro-business. I mean, we can't we've got to be enthusiastic about business. Yeah. We've got to be critical. But what we can't do is say, oh, capitalism's finished because of the dot-com boom or something like that. Bust. So I went about it saying, first of all, what really matters is knowledge about modern finance. So capital markets are really important. Right, who have we got? Right, this person, actually it was Gillian Tett, seems to me to be really smart. And so I'm going to promote her immediately. And then I'm going to look at the intellectual capacity and is it good enough? And the people who are really big, I'm going to promote. I'm going to make them big names. I'm going to be like some Hollywood movie producer.
Making the actors.
Yeah, definitely, because there are stars.
Yeah.
I mean, some people didn't like that because they hate it. Like, if you're just talking about stars, where does that leave me? I remember we created something called the A-list, and then one of the top commentators came in to see me and said, does that mean I'm on the B-list?
Yes.
I mean, the egos. Yeah, I said, let me think about that. But I think, so it's a mix of things, and then there's the sort of management team where if you're fortunate, I think I was old enough to realize that you want people who are going to challenge you. They have to be loyal, but you don't want a lot of yes women or yes men. Mm-hmm. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
So I think I had enough knowledge. Obviously, you don't get it right first time, but the measure of success is, first of all, the readership went up. We got 1 million plus paying readers. But then the leadership team actually, when I stepped down after 15 years, just nearly, nobody left. Even the disappointed candidates, they thought the institution was big enough that it wasn't just about them or me. And I think that's good. I mean, I care about that. I like that kind of leadership.
The increase in readership and popularity is an easy measure of success, I would say. You should look at the numbers. They don't lie. But on a personal level, when interviewing people and crafting stories and sharing a message, all driven by that curiosity you're talking about, what was your personal measure of success?
I think the technical term is a holy shit story.
Okay.
Just where you walk out that interview and you go, wow, I can't wait to get to the computer and file this. And that was like the interview with Vladimir Putin, where we were in the Kremlin waiting for 4 hours. And then we finally get in there and I greet him in German and he answers me in German back. And I'm playing, and he said, where did you learn your German? And I said, actually at Oxford. And I said, but I didn't just learn it at Oxford or in Germany, but also at Oxford, where I studied modern history. And he looked at me and in German said to me, und was ist denn moderne Geschichte, die moderne Geschichte? And I'm going, what's modern history? He says to me, and I go, oh God, what am I going to say? And it was like being hit by Joe Frazier. You know, it was so, my brain was scrambled. And then I said to him back in German, everything after 1989, that's modern history. And then he said, sit down. So the thing is, I knew that would be a great story. You can write about it, tell about it. I mean, that I got really excited about. And then when he said the liberal idea is obsolete, that kind of story when you're in the meeting with someone powerful, big world leader, and you walk away. But, you know, there were other things. We did some great investigations, Wirecard, the investigation into the German payments company, but there's like Enron. Yeah. When, you know, we had to fight for months. The whole German establishment was after us. They were threatening us with criminal sanctions. But then there'd be some just stories where, you know, people were just day in, day out producing great journalism and very high stakes. So global financial crisis, when literally the world almost melted down. Yeah. You know, I think that was a very exciting time, but where you knew it was a collective effort, not just me or a reporter in a big meeting.
Yeah. Like the moment with Vladimir Putin, using humor and that very relaxed opener.
Yeah.
Is that something you would always do, to just lighten up?
Yes. I figured that if, as long as I did it in, I hope, a classy way,
yeah,
with a little bit of impishness, not too much, but where you get the people's attention. So I deliberately spoke to Vladimir Putin in German because I knew he spoke very good. He speaks excellent German. I mean, it's akzentfrei. He is really, you know, because he was a spy in Dresden. But similarly with Donald Trump, when I interviewed him, you know, I rehearsed my opening line, which was, you know, we were in the Oval Office and I said, thank you, Mr. President, for making time to see us. And thank you for subscribing to the Financial Times. And he looked at me and he just went, that's okay. You lost, I won. So there was a little bit of a game, you know, he was a step, I was putting my little patch, he shot back, you know. I think these things are worth doing because always the opener to a conversation is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And if you're too bowing and scraping and thank you very much and your nose is on the floor, Putin will wipe you know, he will take you to the cleaners. So, or on Trump too, because these are powerful people.
Yeah.
Now, you know, if you go to see the chairman of the Federal Reserve, you know, you probably a little bit slightly different, you know, comment probably.
I get the question all the time of how do you approach people in power and people who are powerful? So these two examples are great, but is there a formula that you have that you can share that you've even used away from the pen, away from journalism, and in your own personal life of using humor, using this lightheartedness to connect with people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I did it earlier, by the way. I mean, obviously, if you're the editor, you know, you have a certain station. I mean, obviously, you're not president of Russia or president of the United States. And by the way, I would also be in France. If you go in the Élysée, I mean, it's so French that, you know, making a little English joke probably doesn't work.
Even in French.
I think my French accent isn't really good enough to make a joke in French.
Fine.
But I think so it does depend a bit. I mean, I remember. I'll give you one other example because I'm thinking about where did I use humor. I remember being in Colombia,
Okay.
and this was the last interview of a Latin American trip we'd done. We'd been in Argentina and Brazil, and we went to Colombia, and I was with the Latin American editor. And you go into the president's palace, and the security is unbelievable. It's bigger than the Knesset in Jerusalem. I mean, it's just, really, really, really tight. And there are women guards wearing guns and everything. And anyway, I went in and sitting there and, would you like a coffee? After 3 coffees in 2 hours, I'm going, where is this interview? And so I said to my colleague, what's going on? And he said, I don't know. Anyway, and I was conscious of this person behind me. And I looked back, and it was this little guy, and he said, Signor Barber. And I said, yes, Barber here. Yes, Financial Times. And he said, Il Presidente, very sorry for him. He very busy. He has a big, important delegation from Venezuela. And he see you in 1 hour. Okay, thank you very much. And he walks off. And I looked at my colleague and I said, I can't believe it. Another hour, that's 3 hours. Anyway, who was that little guy then? He said, that was the president. So I kind of went, that was very funny. But I thought, when I go and see him, I've waited 3 hours. I can't let him get away with this.
Yeah.
So after saying, I realize you're very busy, I asked him one question about his Venezuelan problem on trade. And the second question I said was, I just looked at him and I said, President Uribe, I said, if 2 terms were good enough for George Washington, why aren't they good enough for Uribe? Because he wanted to stand for the 3rd term. And he got up and he literally started advancing to me with fists. And I thought he was going to hit me. And then he kind of stopped and he gave a big smile and he said, because I'm waiting for my Thomas Jefferson. And I thought that, again, that was where you can say something and there's a little bit of humor, but you always get a great reaction. You're going to get a reaction, especially from these kind of people.
Yeah. And you have to stand your ground with your joke.
I think it's important. Yeah, but if you're going to do the joke, you have to do it with conviction.
Yeah.
But you know that.
I try to know it. Not to your... I'm not... My audience is very different. I'm not joking with presidents directly, at least. They might be watching.
Yeah, and if I'd gone to Zelensky in Kiev, I would not be making a joke. Yeah. And I might say at some point, by the way, I'm the one who's bringing the ammunition, or something like that. Just something where you might be able to just leave it. But you'd have to, at the same time, especially in the early interviews, acknowledge, here he is. People have tried to assassinate him. Mm-hmm. He's a war leader. That's got to be solemn and serious, right?
This podcast is brought to you by Poubelle by the Gstaad Guy, bringing you charms hand-painted with enamel on 925 sterling silver, allowing you to express all the things you love and all the things you might question, from Riva bateaus to backgammon boards and caviar tins to paddle rackets. There is a Poubelle charm or completed set for everyone in the know. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the podcast.
I mean, ultimately, you're putting yourself in the field, experiencing things, learning from people, and then storytelling. And through the storytelling, connecting with the reader after having connected with the people you're interviewing. And I think now more than ever, we're in an era where people are journalists without even knowing. I think you made a very clear decision to become a journalist. But because of the way media has moved, and the way people are putting messages out so easily and so frequently, lots of people have assumed the role of journalists passively as a hobby without even realizing. But they're always actively trying to find that connection with their audience and find a great way to tell a story and tell a message. You're the expert here. What does it take to create that great connection with the audience in the same way that you were making that amazing connection with the people you're interviewing?
Again, it's a really a good question because it involves several things, I think. First of all, there's a difference between the citizen journalist who is just blowing off, sounding off an opinion.
Like me.
Or, no, I wouldn't say that, but or also someone who's just repeating a rumor or, coming out with something that seems sensational, but it sort of disappears in 10 seconds under scrutiny. So we have to distinguish between those people who are doing sort of quasi-journalistic things as opposed to what I call journalism, which is still a kind of crafted message. And I don't mean crafted in a sinister sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, actually, you're taking time to think about the words, the images, and what it is. Now, to establish the connection, I actually think that showing some humanity is important. So that means a bit of modesty from yourself, but also where you're trying to connect with the person that you're writing about, or especially when you're interviewing. So that means empathy, humanity at the extreme end, if you like, but empathy. Then I think if you're doing the kind of journalism, I started a Substack column. It means giving in a way that was not true. You asked this question earlier in our conversation about what the Financial Times was like. Well, in 1985, I mean, God forbid that you as a reporter showed any of your own personality. I mean, we don't want any of that, would be the answer. Whereas I think now with Substack, with others, where you have a picture associated with you, or also the humor, you're trying to convey a bit more of your character. Mm-hmm. To attract an audience. An audience, by the way, that's got hundreds and hundreds of other options to how to spend their time. And then I think my other comment were the two words I use, which I certainly used at the Financial Times, was when there were people asking about, well, how do we survive? How do we thrive in this new era of journalism and media? I'd say deep and original. Well, original, certainly. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talked about how you started Gstaad Guy, when this was an original. So it was something different. Yeah. And if you're just in the sort of middling mainstream, you're not going to get anywhere. That doesn't mean to say you have to go to an extreme. It just means you need, what's your original take? Mm-hmm. And I think that requires a bit of reflection, but also a bit of creativity.
And when you're making an original take, can you be as original in your frame of thinking, or do you need to assume some level of values or assumed expectations of the publication that you're representing as a journalist as well?
Well, again, distinguish between you're operating on Substack, for example, or Instagram, versus you're contributing to a magazine, mm-hmm. like The Atlantic or The Spectator or The New Statesman. And as soon as you enter that, where you're essentially writing for someone else, I mean, you still need to be yourself, but you kind of need to be aware of who that magazine's audience is.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously when you're, if you like, operating free to air, direct with your audience, well, it's you in a sea of other options. Mm-hmm. So I think it's slightly different. But again, I think finding your own voice is very important. I mean, I found that as a writer. It took me a long time. Mm-hmm. Because when you're starting, unless you happen to be a genius, which I'm not, people take time to develop their writing style. Mm-hmm. And it's constantly evolving, by the way. It doesn't stop.
Absolutely. I mean, I can adapt and perfect my expression style, my videos, and the ways I communicate with my audience with a very tight feedback loop. I can put a message out, see how people react, and put another message out that's slightly different based on how they've reacted. But that's incredibly modern. What did the feedback loops look like in 2005 and prior, when you didn't really have that immediate conversation with the reader? And how could you adapt your tone of voice accordingly?
Again, I remember I wanted to write a column because that was a sort of status thing. But I'm a reporter by nature, and I don't have really strong opinions. But I'd done 5 years in Brussels, and I thought I want to write a column from Europe called European Viewpoint. So I asked the top columnist at the Financial Times, who was in his 60s, and I said, what do I need to do? I'm writing a column. And he just said, you need to find your own voice, but you won't find it for months, year, more, because it's a new genre, it's a new type of form, and so you'll need to experiment. And I remember that when I was dealing with columnists at the Financial Times, because some of them, they're actually, even though they're brilliant, they're quite insecure. So you need to sort of nurture them. Now, just going back to directly answer your question, the only feedback that you got was letters to the editor or letters from readers. I mean, or maybe your peers inside the newspaper. So it was nowhere near as fine-tuned as we now have. And of course, with print, in effect, it was one shot. Okay, could be a later edition of the newspaper where you could change it, but it's not anywhere near as malleable as now. So I think the scope for refining, fine-tuning is far greater. I mean, I think that must present other kinds of challenges, but it certainly can be done more quickly and flexibly.
And how do you decide between sharing a message that you think the audience would like to hear versus sharing a message that's maybe more aligned with your own truth and what you think is important to share that the audience may not like?
Well, I think again, this is becoming a Chinese confession here, but I think Twitter was fast becoming a problem because you'd start to express yourself in a way that you knew that would get a rise or get people provoked online. And so, especially for example, post-Brexit, I mean, I did put some tweets out, especially after I left my job as editor. And I think probably it's not very valuable, but I was doing it partly or consciously, that I knew that people would react to it because it was sharp, but not necessarily good. I mean, it's sort of a bit frivolous.
But it's rewarded with the engagement.
And then, of course, your numbers would go up. I mean, it's perverse. So you could say, I mean, I'm being exaggerating for purpose here, but I got over 100,000 followers, and I've said some really dumb things the last week. And so I've stopped all that. And I'm on the different medium. I would do occasional tweet to promote something, but Substack I find a better platform. But I think is that there's a real problem in the way in which some of these social media platforms, I never used Facebook, encourage people to do not particularly smart things. And it doesn't contribute to what I would say good public discourse. I mean, obviously, one shouldn't be too romantic because the public square has always been raucous, whether in ancient Greece, Rome, London, coffee houses in the 18th century to online. But there's we don't need to see society as a sort of formal debating society. But I think the quality of discourse, nevertheless, has decreased sharply in this social media age.
Yeah, I think so too. How have you seen storytelling change as a result as well in all medias?
Well, I've become increasingly interested in the storytelling through image, on video, short form video. Clearly, it's incredible what you can do. You can slice and dice and do things in a way which is inconceivable in the earlier age of journalism. And then I do think podcasting, we're doing one now, but podcasting has certainly allowed people to do, well, there's one favorite podcast that I really like. The rest is history with Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland. But mainly because, you can do something on General Custer, 9 episodes. I knew a bit about the Indian Wars in the States in the 1870s. Oh my God, this was amazing. Or Peter the Great Northern War. So there's ways of bringing across to a mass audience subjects which seemed abstruse or forgotten that can be brought to life by intelligent, well-informed individuals. Now, there can be a lot of kind of natter, but if you think of Joe Rogan, for example, he's created a huge success out of long-form interviews. And look what happened in the presidential campaign. I mean, Donald Trump did 3+ hours conversation. And yeah, it was repetitive a bit, but actually it was quite revealing at the same time. So all this is kind of I would say on balance, encouraging. It's not a one-way street.
And whether you're telling a story through a podcast or a social media clip, what would you say the fundamentals are to share a good story?
People. I mean, we're still human beings. We haven't been taken over by AI.
Or maybe the tips for the people, more so.
Yeah, I mean, if storytelling should involve people, but we need to know what kind of people they were. They're not just names, right? And motivation. Let's get into their psyche. That's interesting. I think that always mystery is important, and you can define mystery different ways. I mean, obviously there's the crime mystery, but why did people do things? Well, they're human beings. They're difficult. They're complex individuals. So getting underneath that and revealing, revealing the persona behind the crafted image. Or, people, very rich people, they live in bubbles. They don't want anybody finding out about what they're up to. Very secretive, puncturing that a bit. Because, I mean, you and I know this. I mean, it is quite incredible how much money a number of people have. I mean, it's off the charts.
Yep.
I couldn't believe it. Do you know the first time I noticed this was in 1998, and I was with my family, my wife and 2 kids, and we were in Aspen. And we stayed with a Texan lawyer friend who had a sugar bread house in Aspen.
What's a sugar bread house?
Well, it's gingerbread, sorry.
Oh.
It's a sort of smaller, it's like in the Grimm's Tale wooden house. And then we noticed that these huge places were being built in the meadow. And I asked my friend, and he said, that's just another starter castle. That's what he called them. And I remember this was just in the run-up to the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
That was when I first realized, oh my God, people are making so much money out of the stock market bubble. And then, of course, even though it deflated, and now we're seeing it, people being hired for AI, $100 million. I mean, this is incredible. I'm not saying it's healthy, but I think journalism's got a duty to explain how do we get to this place? What should we do, if anything? I don't know, but it's certainly worth discussion.
What can you tell us about the secret lives of the rich, powerful, and elite that I try to use humor to talk about in my content, but that you've been exposed to over the years in a very different way?
Well, I would offer you one word: boats. I find the boats really fascinating. What are the interiors like? What's the art like? Have they got any taste? And some of the boats are most beautiful, and the size. And, what's the captain like? Is he a nice guy, or is he spoiled as hell? Or how are the crew treat? All these things tell you about sort of the rich and famous. I think boats is a good one. Obviously, their houses. I think...
Is that how you would paint a picture about a person? Look at the environment they've built around themselves and the people they surround themselves with?
Absolutely. Is when I remember going in to interview James Baker, the Secretary of State, and who was close friends with George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, and he's probably one of the people I most admire. Incredibly effective White House Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, Treasury Secretary, did loads of things, had really good people around him. And I remember when I finally persuaded him to give me an interview, I went into his office and I noticed that there were only about 10 books on his shelf. And normally, I mean, these people are Secretaries of State, they'll have a library because they want to show everybody how intelligent they are. And I remember asking him, why have you only, I see you've got some books on your shelf. And he said, yeah, I've got, those are the books I mentioned in the index more than 5 times. I mean, that's kind of one way of looking at it.
It's true.
But no, I think their habitat. Mm-hmm. These are big beasts, so you want to understand what the habitat is, and also how they treat you. I don't expect to be treated with lots of respect, but a modicum. Let's at least be polite.
Mm-hmm. I
mean, you asked to see me, or we're doing this interview, so don't be bored. I mean, I haven't even opened my mouth. So, or person can be very, it makes a difference.
It kind of sounds like a first date.
Yes.
You got to figure out as much as you can about the person without being too intrusive. Figure out how they like to do things, how they live.
Yeah. I think it is a bit like the first date, except somebody else is paying.
It's true. And you are expected to talk about it after, which usually is not great after a first date.
Not great after the first date. No, I agree with that. I would say that the other thing about the rich and famous is they can often be very private.
Yeah.
So I've just written this biography of Masayoshi Son, the SoftBank founder. He's run that company 40 plus years. He's lost several fortunes, and he's also made a lot of money. But he's a very private man. So if you're writing a biography, it's a bit difficult because, he's very protective of his 2 daughters. Nobody knows what their names are. Mm-hmm. All that. And there comes a point where you say, how much is the private life relevant or not relevant? I think maybe in Japan it's a bit different. But then somebody else I've been very interested, Gianni Agnelli, the great Fiat boss from the night. I mean, he was the world's greatest playboy. Mm-hmm. So you kind of, I mean, he's had many first dates.
Yeah, he has.
So if you're writing about him, then you kind of maybe do need to have the jet set bit. I mean, not everything. So all these things are, I think, quite interesting if you're a writer and author.
It's a funny thing because I observe these people for a living and tell the stories in a very different way, but I do observe that in many ways they seek the eyeballs in the early days of their career and then fight for the privacy as things really pick up, and the privacy becomes a real luxury where they actually compete over privacy. Somewhere like Gstaad, you're the coolest guy in Gstaad if no one knows you're in Gstaad.
Yes, I think that's very well observed, that they covet it more in their older age. I mean, there's Sam Altman was saying recently that he can't go out to dinner. That's the OpenAI founder, because people, he's just got a baby. His partner, his husband wants to go out for dinner, but they're photographed immediately, and I feel that's tough actually. But obviously there are many people who desperately want the publicity, but they want it one way.
Yeah.
And so you then have to kind of start thinking about, well, how much you are a public figure, so you can't expect to be completely private.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It's a balance. It's a tough one. On the Gstaad Guy podcast, we always play this game of à la poubelle, which, as you know, means to the trash in French.
In the trash can.
In the trash can. Versus Fantastique. Can you share a couple of things that you find to be à la poubelle about the world you find yourself in that you'd like to change? Maybe a couple of things you find to be fantastique that you'd like to celebrate.
Fantastique. I just love cycling. I will cycle anywhere.
Road bikes?
Road
mountain
bikes. Not off trail, road bikes,
Okay.
mountains. I've been all over the world cycling, in the Rockies, in Southeast Asia, Cambodia,
Amazing.
Thailand.
How do you feel about
Africa.
the e-bikes?
I'm still too young to be on an e-bike. I'm a bit of an mammal, middle-aged man in Lycra, so I kind of still think that I don't need to have an e-bike.
I've never heard that. Mammal.
I'm a mammal. Yeah, mammal, fantastique.
That's good.
À la poubelle, I can't stand chit-chat. And there's too much of it on the radio, on television. And if I'm being an old fogey, à la poubelle, I mean, okay, we need youth, but do we have everything around youth? No. I mean, there's the older people that also matter. We can have some intelligent conversation. Fantastique. Oh, I love sport. I love the fact that an English women's football team, the Lionesses, won in extra time on penalties that we've never done before. Amazing. I love German beer.
Okay.
I love ein Maß, full, massive jug of beer that I get in Munich, because that's where I spent my first 8 months before going to Oxford.
Is that your cycling reward? I often see the mammals having a beer.
Yeah, but not a Maß. Just maybe a pint.
A pint.
Not more than that, because you'll fall off. But no, Fantastique is definitely cycling. And then...
Cycling is very chic these days in the Gstaad Aspen community.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
It's very in. Some ways it's become an elite sport. You have a lot of bells and whistles that add up in the basket.
All about the kit.
All about the kit.
It's all about the kit.
Sometimes all bark and no bite.
Yeah, I mean, people can be, really fanatical about this. I mean, I do have a nice bike, 2 bikes actually, and I do measure my performance. So that's probably a bit should go that in the Poubelle.
No, I think it's good. I'm sure it's great. I cut you off. You had one more. Forgive me.
I was going to say, I went to my first opera in Berlin in 1974, and it was Rheingold.
Okay.
And I loved it. And I do like Wagner a lot, but I love Verdi and Mozart in opera. I've been to operas again, a lot of places around the world, and at its best, it is fantastique. I'm not going to name the opera that I put in the Poubelle because at the moment I've forgotten.
That's totally fine. I'm very excited to listen to your audiobook.
Thank you.
Learn more about Massa. Is there one thing you can tell us about the book that people can't figure out by the cover?
Yeah, I mean, this guy's an outsider. He's got amazing resilience. I mean, who loses 3 fortunes and comes back?
Yeah.
And the reason is because he's Korean Japanese. So he's a real outsider in Japan, not trusted.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a gambler. His father was a pig breeder, loan shark. He came from the other side. And the thing I would share with you is he said to his mentor when he was about 22 that he had a recurring dream. He couldn't sleep, and he had this dream where he was living in a shanty town, which is where he grew up, and the pigs used to roam around the house. It was actually a shack, and the smell of the pig was so strong that he kept waking up at night with that stench. And somebody said, it's not a dream or a nightmare, it's a memory. I thought that was very interesting psychology. Anyway, it's a great book. He does amazing mad things, crazy things, and he always comes back.
He does. Big bets, big bet on AI now.
Big bet on AI now. There he was with President Trump, promising not 100 billion, not 200 billion, but 500 billion. Maybe that's a bit high. But, he's there. He's back at the high table.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be with you. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you for sharing your story, and hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lionel. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Gstaad Guy podcast. If you're keen to learn more, please follow along by engaging with our social channels on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Merci beaucoup, à la prochaine, and a big hug from the Gstaad Guy.